Hello everyone and welcome back to the Plutonium Show. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had a great weekend. Going through a bit of a heat wave here, so if you're going through the same, stay cool, stay hydrated, and stay in the shade. The sun ain't as cool as we all like to make it. In terms of a tan, I mean. You know, tans are overrated. Pluto, 2025. You can quote me. The agenda for today. First of all, we're going to start off with some more gaslighting from the Sussex clan. As ever, is it a day on this earth if we weren't gaslit? Is that the plural or the past tense of gaslight? By Meghan and Harry? I think not. Followed by another mega tantrum by Prince Harry. Again, same old, the sky is blue. Before we finally talk about a new topic, a premiere, a debut, which has been highly requested, but the planets have aligned because it also happens to be a topic that I have been personally keeping track of, following, and very interested in myself, which is the Macrons versus Candace Owens. We've been hearing for a few weeks now, and I don't even think I ever mentioned it because it's just, rumors that Meghan and Harry's Netflix deal that was signed back in 2020, 5 years ago now, where has the time gone, has basically come to an end. And we've also been hearing rumors that they would be given a first look deal, which is basically there's no exclusivity. There's no guarantee that Netflix is going to pick up any of their projects. We'll have a look if we're interested. Sure. Otherwise, sorry, we'll pass. It's basically the same deal that the Obamas, the Sussex's role models, have been offered. The first thing that I noticed when I was looking into this topic, just to briefly mention it today, was, the mainstream media mainstreaming as they do. It's crazy how the news will attempt to gaslight us. And I'm guessing some of these are on the Sussex payroll. So if you actually Google Meghan and Harry Netflix deal, you'll see that many publications are spinning it as an extension or a renewal of the pre-existing deal, which is a much more lucrative and impressive deal than a first look. But that's not the case. You'll see other publications, of course, such as Sky News, which, they hate Meghan and Harry, calling it a downgrade. But I decided to go with a more, I suppose, impartial source, The Hollywood Reporter. They haven't always been pro Meghan and Harry, but they haven't always been anti Meghan and Harry either. And they go with the downgrade narrative as well, because that is the truth, despite what Meghan and Netflix themselves would have us believe. So it says actually in the title here, if you ask the streamer, it's an extension, but that's not true. An extension would imply the pre-existing deal of, the 100 million in quotation marks, because Netflix themselves have denied that figure, has been extended. But that's not what's going on here. And one thing I really wanted to hone in on here is, I'm going to ignore the statement from Meghan going, oh, we're so proud. Okay, yeah, whatever. But this one from, where did it go? Bella Bajaria, who apparently was the originator for the idea of With Love Meghan. She says, Harry and Meghan are influential voices whose stories resonate with audiences everywhere. And then she goes on to yet again mention a 3-year-old documentary, Harry and Meghan, which, yes, did do well, but that was it. That was their one-off. As proof of the fact that their story, or the claim rather, that their story resonates. I mean, come on. For something to resonate with us as an audience, one assumes there would be a feeling of shared emotions, shared experiences. We can relate to the story. What part of Harry and Meghan's elitist life and petty complaints have resonated with us, the so-called average Joe? Was it when we were all languishing during the pandemic, some of us destitute, out of a job, out of a home, with all of our savings dwindling, terrified that our loved ones would die, while Meghan and Harry sat in the Garden of Eden, the proverbial Garden of Eden, with Oprah Winfrey and complained about how the royal family was no longer going to financially support them. Did that resonate with you? Or was it when they sat there in the documentary or the reality show, as we like to call it, and complained about how small Nottingham Cottage was? A cottage on palace grounds, no less. I'm pretty sure that resonated with all of us, that we have so much in common with them. We just can't help it. It wasn't just the fact that it was the airing of dirty laundry that attracted eyeballs. No. It's just ridiculous. What piqued my interest was the fact that the Obamas, with their production company, Higher Productions, were also offered a first look deal rather than an extension. And so, just to be fair, because we're all seeing this first look deal as a downgrade, which it is, I wondered why the Obamas were offered such a deal. And I went on to their website, Higher Ground, and basically I didn't do it for every single one of their productions because, believe it or not, unlike the Sussexes, they've actually produced quite a bit of content. So we'll give them that. Whether they've been profitable or successful is a different story. So their first ever production was American Factory. And much like Meghan and Harry, you see a very similar trajectory, even though they're very different productions. American Factory, yes, is also a documentary, but it wasn't about Michelle and Barack Obama. It was a documentary about how high-tech China clashes with working-class America. I haven't watched it, just reading the synopsis straight off Rotten Tomatoes. Now, this production did do incredibly well, as reflected in these reviews, 95% with the critics and 82% with the audience. However, the rest of their productions, especially their more recent ones, which I've looked into, have performed quite poorly. So with Air Force Elite, which was released on the 23rd of May this year, it basically doesn't have any ratings on Rotten Tomato. The same with Court of Gold, another documentary released in 2024 about the Paris Olympics men's basketball tournament, also doesn't have any reviews. The Later Daters, a dating show about people who are of a certain age, later in life, also doesn't have reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. Our Oceans, it really keeps going. Starting 5, I looked that up as well. That's got a 60% average review. So one can see, what's the point of all this? One can see what leads to Netflix moving its clients, for lack of a better word, or talent, to a first look deal. Clearly, they're not worth the money that they were initially signed up for. And so Meghan and Harry can try to spin this as much as they want. It's pretty clear what the reality is. Moving on, speaking of gaslighting, moving on to this article that I came across in the New York Post. This is last week news, and I wasn't going to talk about it because I was like, oh, come on, the bullying allegations again, denying them yet again. It's old news. She's been doing that. She's never confessed. She's been denying the story since it broke. In fact, initially, if you remember, her storyline was the royal family, the palace rather, did this on purpose to smear me because they knew that I was coming out with explosive allegations, which have all since been debunked, on the Oprah show, on the Oprah interview rather, excuse me. And that was her storyline. Now she's changed it. So apparently the story has been brought up again in an interview between Valentine Lowe and Kinsey Schofield. I haven't seen the interview, but there are a few quotations here in this article. It's the same story, basically. There wasn't that much that was new. It was the usual. The staff were petrified, terrorized, and they really don't want to come out in the public because they just want to move on with their lives. But we get this new information, at least to me, about how Meghan and Harry's legal team they sent a very, very long letter to Valentine Lowe after Courtiers was published which presumably was ignored from the looks of it. But then sometime later, they got another slightly less long letter, basically being very feisty, very strong. And they went on to publish anyway and didn't hear a word from them. I don't think they've ever sent a letter to Tom Bauer, but yeah, of course you're not going to hear a word from them, because I'm willing to bet, not that I'm a betting person, that everything Valentine Lowe put in his book was true. And you can't defame someone, or rather a true statement cannot be defamatory. But what we also learned from this article, which is what compelled me to mention it today, is these statements from Meghan's spokesperson, because, you know, she's so important, she needs a spokesperson. The spokesperson told the Post that Lowe is blasting harmful gossip. So this is gossip now, right? Something that you didn't sue about, because gossip implies it's just rumors. It's not based, you know, on facts, on reality. And continues to desperately recycle false, offensive, and get this, long discredited allegations in an apparent bid to sell books and resuscitate relevance. Long discredited, hence what I'm deeming to be gaslighting. When have these allegations ever been discredited, Meghan? Unless she counts her denials, because, you know, she's Meghan Markle, my goodness, a godsend, an angel upon earth, a goddess rather. I'm not trying to be blasphemous, but this is how she behaves. Her word is gospel. And so if she comes out and denies these allegations, then they've been long discredited, I suppose, because there is no one else who has been able to disprove these allegations. And in fact, again, the fact that they haven't been able to sue speaks volumes. She says that these claims, rooted in anonymous, unverifiable sources, form a part of a broader and deeply troubling agenda that seeks to dehumanize a woman who has consistently stood up for fairness, dignity, and truth. This is actual fiction. You know, if you're so good at spinning fiction, Meghan, maybe you should try to monetize it by making fictional dramas for Netflix, for your first look deal. How's that? That's a good suggestion. Might actually give Netflix a reason to pay you some money. If anyone's desperate, I think we all know it's not Valentine Lowe. Let's put it that way. All right, I quickly have to move on to this next story, which also is almost as infuriating as Meghan's fiction that she's trying to spin as reality, which is Harry's mega tantrum, which he has had over the Sentabale charity commission findings. I've made a whole video about it. We're not going to broach it right now. We're running out of time. But basically, both sides have been, have been to blame, rather. And Harry just won't have it. What he's doing now is, according to the Daily Mail, he's hitting back at Dr. Sophie Chandauka by launching a new African charity. That's not the part I want to focus on. Go ahead, have at it. If you're actually going to benefit children, then, they're the winners in this. I don't care. What I want to focus on is Harry's tantrum. So rather than accept the findings and go, all right, we're both to blame, I'm going to learn from this and move on, potentially set up another charity, as he said. No, he had to write to the commission and try to throw Dr. Chandauka under the bus by saying that she has revisited serious, highly charged and damaging allegations. How dare she? Because she has briefly alluded to them in her statement. It said the claims directly impact his other charity work, adding, Ms. Chandauka continues to publicly recycle these claims, this time beneath the guise of clarification, all while leveraging the charity's public platform to do so. This conduct appears to directly contravene your warning about the risks of airing internal disputes in the media and seems to constitute an ongoing misuse of charitable resources for the pursuit of personal vindication. This, you cannot make this up. Does he not realize that apart from the fact that he started this, in the sense that he put this out in the public domain to begin with, and I'm not taking sides here. I'm not saying Dr. Chandauka is faultless, but she merely responded. Now, whether she should have is a different story. But that's what she did. So you can do it. Once again, rules for thee and not for me. Not to mention the fact that he's done it again after the charity's findings were published. He's released not just a statement expressing his disappointment and basically saying Dr. Chandauka has to be held responsible for her actions, but he's had his insiders, sources leak that this was all a hostile takeover and just trying to discredit and destroy Dr. Chandauka's reputation. So he's allowed to do it. That's fine. But if she does it in a very diplomatic way, at least more diplomatic than he did. If you look at her statement, we looked at it in the video that I made last week, she actually does mention Prince Harry and Prince Seiso and their vision in a positive light, I would say. So, mega tantrum, yet again. Someone needs to seriously check in on this man. This almost 41-year-old man. And, just like Meghan said 6 years ago in her South Africa interview, ask him if he's okay. Are you okay, Harry? Is your wife asking you if you're okay? Because your tantrums, which are getting more embarrassing and desperate as time goes by, indicate otherwise. All right, finally, in these last 10 minutes or so of the episode, let's briefly touch upon the Macron versus Owens defamation case. Now, I've been following this story, as I said, personally in my own time, since I first became aware of it, I think January of this year. And I actually moved to France, ironically, earlier this year. And that's when I was watching Candace's Becoming Brigitte series. This just fell on my lap. Probably because my YouTube is now YouTube France, YouTube FR, which is hilarious. You think they try to suppress it, if anything. But YouTube picked up that, hey, you're in this region. Maybe you'd be interested in this. And interested I was. So it's technically a 6-part, but 8-part if you count the prologue and the epilogue series, where Candace, who was inspired by French journalists before her, so Natasha Ray, who describes herself as a journalist, I'm not sure, she's an independent journalist, but Xavier Poussard, I'm trying to pronounce things properly because I feel like it's my responsibility now. If you live in a country, you need to adopt its language and its way of life. They have both been covering this story long before Candace, and I have noticed that the few other couple of commentators I've seen cover this have entirely missed that point. Candace didn't invent this rumor, as they like to deem it. And in fact, episode 6 was entirely an interview between Candace and Xavier Poussard, who has fled to Italy, by the way, and has recently been summoned by the Italian police for a cyber security allegation. I think it's progressed now to a lawsuit, but not cybersecurity, cyberbullying, but not defamation. That's been leveled against Candace. In a nutshell, this series is about Candace, as I said, using the resources and information gathered by these French individuals, and she uses that information to explore, or try to prove, I should say, that the French First Lady, Brigitte Macron, was born a man. Without going into too much detail, you can go watch the series. My opinion doesn't matter, so I'm going to leave it out. Basically, the question really that people, I'm sure, want to know from, want answered from me as, an expert, I suppose, in defamation law, is whether Candace is actually guilty of defamation. Now, I do have the 219-page lawsuit that has been filed by Brigitte Macron. If there's enough interest, I will go through it and make a video. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, it's quite lengthy, and so I suppose if this episode doesn't do well, then I might not do it. But obviously, Brigitte disagrees and alleges that Candace's false statements have harmed her reputation. So, the question is Candace actually in the wrong? And that's where things get interesting, because with public figures such as Brigitte Macron, Candace is being sued in Delaware, by the way, because that's where her companies were set up, you know, like everyone else, I suppose, for those tax cuts or whatever, tax benefits. But the question is ultimately, did Candace knowingly make a false statement of fact? So is there actual malice? Did she know it was false, or did she have a reckless disregard for the truth or falsehood of the statement? And the gist of it for me, as someone who has been following the story, is that I don't see how the Macrons are going to get over the actual malice hurdle. I really don't, because Candace, I know she's been known to be quite an inflammatory individual. Don't know enough about her to claim that she does this on purpose. You know, I don't know if she's deliberately controversial, but I will say, I haven't just seen the series. I've seen every episode where Candace has covered this story. This, you know, before she was sued, when she got the letters warning her, and she had sent letters back going, "What, can you please answer these questions? We're happy to come fly all over to France and interview you. Give us the information. I am happy to be corrected." That's what Candace has put out there. And they haven't responded to any of these questions. The only evidence they've given so far are a YouTube screenshot, you know, from a video of the inauguration where her brother, Jean-Michel Tognaud, who Candace claims is Brigitte. So she claims Brigitte was born Jean-Michel and then became Brigitte. And so they sent her a screenshot proving that's not the case. Candace is like, "I'm sorry, that doesn't prove anything." And then they sent her a newspaper clipping, which is also included in the lawsuit, amongst other photos as well, wedding photos, you know, really old photos. The newspaper clipping announces the birth of one Brigitte Tognaud in 1953, I think, 1st of December. So right now, the evidence they've been providing isn't the strongest. One would assume you'd have stronger evidence. But as I said, I don't know what the reasoning is. Maybe she feels she's really above this and she won't have her arm twisted, you know, by one Candace Owens. And she's probably thinking, who are you for me to produce my birth certificate? Or who are you for me to prove this and that? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But I truly believe Candace believes in what she's doing. Let me know if you disagree. From what I've seen, she seems to truly believe this, and it will be very hard to prove actual malice given all the research she's done. The fact that she's based her findings on the research done by other independent French journalists or independent journalists, whatever you want to call them. I will say Natasha Ray and Amandine Roy, who is a psychic medium, made a YouTube video, I think back in 2020 or something, talking about this. And they were sued by Brigitte Macron for defamation. It was on a technicality. I forget the actual point on which she sued them. But she succeeded in the first instance, and then an appeal court very recently overturned that finding because it found that Natasha and Amandine were not acting out of malice. There was no malicious intent. They were acting in good faith. So I've heard Brigitte is going to appeal to an even higher court because she's not happy with that. But it's a very convoluted story. And Candace is just the most prominent figure. You know, it doesn't start and end with her. Now, the other question is, apart from it being a statement of fact, because it has to be, by the way, this is not an opinion. Candace is not saying, in my opinion, Brigitte Macron is a man. No. She's saying, I believe this to be a fact. And that's important because a statement of fact can be defamatory. However, an opinion cannot. It's subjective by its very nature. A statement of fact is something that you can either prove to be true or false. And of course, in this instance, this falls under a statement of fact. And that's why I always tell people whenever I can, if you say, in my opinion, or allegedly, after a statement of fact, if you qualify it as your opinion, that doesn't save you from a defamatory claim or from a defamation claim. It doesn't save you if what you then say is not, in fact, your opinion. So if Candace says, in my opinion, I think Brigitte's a man, you can still get sued over that opinion because it's not an opinion. The other point that I want to briefly touch upon is harm to reputation, which is also an element. You know, a statement can be false, but if it doesn't affect you negatively, it's not defamatory. You know, it's a lie, but it's not defamation. And so here one would argue, especially since the Macrons have told Candace in an early letter that they're very proud to be supporters of the trans community, one would argue, why would you think this would harm your reputation then? If you don't think it's an insult, and if you don't care what people say, you know who you are. I'm just being devil's advocate here. I've been called a transgender in my comments, presumably because of my deep voice. I don't care. That's not defamatory to me because I know I'm a woman. So looking at it from that angle, is it really harming your reputation? I suppose you can argue, well, they're lying to their people. They're lying to the public. But I think the public is mostly preoccupied with the scandal of an almost 40-year-old teacher forming an affair, basically starting an affair with her 15-year-old student. You know, if they met in 1991, he was 14. So I think that's the more scandalous part of your story. And if that wasn't enough to harm your reputation, then I don't doubt, it's arguable rather, that this is a lesser issue. I've looked into age gaps, by the way, in France, and I was actually quite shocked to learn that until 2021, there really wasn't a set age of consent. Right now it's 15, but it's not even really a real age of consent. It's just if you have, sexual relations with a child or a minor under 15, you will be guilty of rape, as opposed to sexual acts with a minor, which is a much lesser offense with a much less serious punishment. I think maximum 7-year prison term or something. So in 1991, there technically was no age of consent. All right, time for my favorite segment, your comments. So I do want to clarify that as much as I can, I go for member comments. But as I said, sometimes the member comments don't inspire debate or a further discussion. They simply, for example, affirm what I've said, or they're very complimentary, which of course I appreciate. But I do try to pick thought-provoking comments, I suppose. And so if I haven't picked a member comment, it's just that I went to the next best thing, which is subscribers. You can filter your YouTube comments as a content creator. You can see who your members are, who your public subscribers are, etc. So the first comment is actually from a member, Joyce Carson 4128, and she says, this is from the Sentabale video, "It's always the poor who suffer when huge egos clash. My goodness, ain't that the truth?" And this instantly reminded me of when, I'm not trying to be political here. I should have thought about this. When Trump announced the whole tariff situation, and I remember being in Europe, the whole currency exchange, the strength of, at the time, the Australian dollars, which I was still transferring over into euros, annihilated. Basically, we lost half of the value of our money at that time, and it was a very stressful period. And that's just us. I'm not talking about everyone else who was impacted by the whole tariff war, a war of egos between China and America, primarily. Excuse me, I hit the microphone. It instantly reminded me of that, but it's a tale as old as time. Wars, conflicts, it's a clash of egos, billionaires against billionaires, or presidents against presidents. Sometimes there's religion, of course. It's all about humans clashing because they are convinced they are right most of the time. That's what really leads to conflict. And so in this case, obviously, it's the children. It's the youth of Sentabale, of Lesotho, who are going to suffer if Sentabale actually ends up shutting down. Because two egos, Dr. Sophie Chandauka and Prince Harry. Prince Harry started it, decided to clash, is what this comment is referring to. Whether you agree on whether Dr. Chandauka, is one of the egos here is up to you. I don't think we know enough about the woman unless we know her personally. I don't think we could definitively say, that it's not a matter of ego. So I'm always very open-minded when it comes to that argument. The next comment we have is from my podcast last week, where we talked about the whole Sydney Sweeney eugenics American Eagle ad. This is from Tom H3599. As a non-American, the USA seems to be obsessed with race and color in ways that the rest of the world cannot understand. I'm supposed to accept that Meghan is a 43% Nigerian black woman, and it's okay for her to constantly brown up with heavy bronzer. But a white woman advertising blue jeans with a bad pun is offensive? Please don't explain. I'm not sure I want to understand. You know what, Tom? I'm not sure I want to understand either. The double standards, how easily people want to read into things, how easily people want to get offended. It really makes you wonder, what is the current state of the world sometimes? I thought we had serious issues in terms of, we're trying to pay the bills, we're trying to get food on the table, we're trying to keep our families warm. And then some people just can sit there and read into things, and because these people really believe in it. I've seen a lot of comments where people really believe this is a eugenics issue. And I'm just, look, live and let live. But I agree with you, Tom. And finally, we have a comment from Rebecca Gilstrap, 3507, correcting me. This is why I picked this up about Martha Stewart. She wasn't on house arrest. She went to big girl prison and gained the respect of her fellow inmates. That to me is the most impressive. So I was wondering why I said house arrest. I was like, how did I get this so wrong? And it turns out we're both right. I just entirely missed out on the 5 months I think she spent in federal prison. So you are correct. And where she taught, she had classes and she taught the inmates how to sew and all these, incredible things. And she was later placed under 5 months of house arrest. So I'm glad to know that I wasn't entirely off the mark, because I was not humiliated. I was just so confused. How did I get this so wrong? How did I read federal prison and switch it to house arrest? They're both correct. But thank you so much. I've been corrected by many people. Thank you so much for correcting me. I think that's all we have time for. Unfortunately, yet again, another episode has come to an end. I really tried to squeeze in a lot in this episode. As usual, as ever, let me know what you think in the comments below. Looking forward to reading them and discussing them next week. Until then, take care.